Hello and welcome back. This is Steve Cammarata here reading to you from my book. This is such a great book and I'm really happy to share it with you. We are on book 2 and I'm on chapter 5, the Bewley building. Bewley building's where my dad worked when I grew up as a kid. A lot of great memories there, which I put into this book. I'm going to read that now. Chapter 5, the Bewley building. The historic Bewley building in Lockport is a place that to this day, when I see it or pass by it, I am instantly filled with many wonderful childhood memories. My father was an optometrist and this is where he worked since before I was born. The ophthalmologist and business partner that my father worked with was also his very good friend and also named Thomas, and he was indeed my brother David's godfather as well. They each had their own private offices and separate exam rooms. We were strictly forbidden to enter his partner's office under any circumstance, and when we were permitted to enter Dad's office, we were told to not touch anything. The not touch anything rule was practically impossible to placate because there were so many cool things to look at and to play with, especially when you're a kid. There were many rules set in place regarding the Bewley building, and my father took them all very seriously, and he simply would not accept any excuses for not following these rules. And he would start by showing us the pictures that he proudly displayed of us 3 children right above his desk in his office, and he would explain that being a Cammarata came with a special responsibility because anything and everything we did as kids was a direct reflection on him, and there would be no greater offense than disgracing the family name and reputation that he worked so hard on cultivating. He went on to tell us how people would recognize who we were because of the pictures of us in his office. He told us that he had spies throughout the entire building who would report to him directly at the first sign of inappropriate behavior. The funny thing I remember about Dad's rules was that they all carried the same weight. There was not one rule that was somehow more important to follow than another rule. The rules were the rules and they were non-negotiable. My dad had so many Bewley building rules that it would be impossible for me to name them all, but I could try to name the top 5. Rule 1, always be polite to everyone. This meant speaking clearly and always with eye contact. A generous amount of saying please and thank you and smiling to anyone and everyone you meet. Rule number 2, no running in the halls or anywhere in the building. No shouting or loud voices or shenanigans of any kind. My dad would tell us to pretend that when we were in the Bewley building that we were in the library and to strive to be as quiet as a church mouse. Rule number 3, always hold the door for people, not just women. Men, women, children, the elderly, etc. My dad would say, if they are breathing and have a heartbeat, you hold the door for them and give them a friendly smile. And he would tell us that oftentimes people would come to his office and see our pictures, and it would give him great joy as a father to hear them say what polite and respectful children he had, and the comments like this would make every day a special day. Rule number 4, do not touch anything. If it didn't belong to you, do not touch it. Rule number 5, always keep the bathrooms clean. Dad would explain that this was one of the most important rules of all. The rule actually came with a tutorial. I can remember vividly the day my dad brought us all 3 kids into the bathroom, including my sister, Elisa. And he gave us very specific instructions of the Bewley building bathroom etiquette. All of the bathrooms on every floor of the Bewley building were kept locked, and the only possible way you could enter was to get the key from the secretary of whatever office you were visiting. With this came great responsibility, and Dad would explain that this meant that if we entered the bathroom and someone before us had left the water on the sink, a toilet unflushed, missed the garbage can with paper towels, etc., it was then incumbent upon us to clean up their mess, because hypothetically speaking, the person who entered the bathroom after us would naturally assume that it was us who left the bathroom a mess. My father took these bathroom rules so seriously that I actually think he would test us and send his spies in after we used the bathroom to inspect them and to make sure that we were adhering to proper protocols. The Bewley building played such a big role in my daily life growing up as a kid in Lockport. We went to Catholic school right down the street, and each day we would go to my dad's work early in the morning and walk to school about an hour later. That meant that we had 1 hour to not get into trouble and to break any of the rules. There was a shoe shine guy on the first floor that my brother and I would always talk to and try not to bother. There was a newspaper and magazine stand that we would frequent each day and try not to get kicked out of. And there was a breakfast and lunch cafe that we were allowed to sit at the counter and have buttered toast and hot chocolate. I remember that I would always draw pictures on the paper placemats, and the cashiers and waitresses would save the special ones, and without me even knowing it, they would give them to my dad, and he would secretly add them to his collection of my special things. Years would go by, and he would show me some of my drawings that he had saved and cherished, and it always made me feel so special to know how much my dad cared about us kids and how he supported the three of us. When my dad wasn't in his office, that meant that he was in exam rooms and vice versa. On his secretary's desk was a huge bowl of Tootsie Pops. We were permitted one each, but sometimes when Dad wasn't looking, she would give us two and a wink, and sometimes when she herself wasn't looking, I would snatch a pocketful. The exam room was awesome. There were so many neat machines and equipment that we were not allowed to touch. Everything had specific settings, and for the most part, we would not touch any of the medical equipment because we knew that it would be obvious to my father if we had. My strongest memory of the Bewley Building days, I would have to say, was the exam chair itself. My brother and I were fascinated by it, and we were constantly being scolded by Dad to quit messing with it. Boys, this machine is not a toy. It is an expensive piece of medical equipment and not meant to be played with, he would warn. It was, however, impossible for us not to play with the chair. The temptation was simply much too great. We would take turns being the patient, while the doctor raised and lowered and adjusted the chair. As a young boy, I always was amazed at how high the chair would go. It had a little white ball-type mechanism at the base of the chair that was magically responsible for raising and lowering the chair. Once, as a prank, my brother thought it would be funny to raise the chair all the way up and then leave the room with me, the patient, trapped and unable to get out of the chair. I couldn't yell for him because that would be a strict violation of one of Dad's rules, and I had no other option but to climb out of the chair. In my haste, I left the room with the exam chair still raised all the way to the top, and I as well neglected to notice the 2 or 3 Tootsie Pops that had fallen out of my pocket in my escape attempt. My dad was not amused by this discovery. He was very disappointed. As a punishment, we were made to spend the hour before school in the waiting room under the careful, watchful eye of the secretary, who would report to Dad at the very first sign of bad behavior. To this very day, people still recognize me from the family pictures in my dad's office. I am often told that I look exactly like my dad, and this warms my heart every time I hear it. People ask me, "Are you Tom Cammarata's son?" I used to be a patient of his way back in the day in the Bewley Building. What a great man your father was. I hear stories about how my father would work out payment plans for patients going through difficult financial times and how understanding my dad was to their plight. I had one man tell me a story with a tear in his eye about the time my dad let him slide on the balance of his account because he was unable to pay. Hearing stories like this and reliving memories of my dad have shaped me into the man I am today. My dad was definitely strict, but the life lessons that he has showed us will last forever. Thank you so much for listening to that chapter.